Yes, welcome to a practical parenting guide on the academic year 2020. Primary things 2020 hasn't really been much of a great year, and I'm sure your little ones are also troubled greatly by being indoors. But the question is, do we really need to worry so much about an academic year 2020? I think I'd like to start answering that primarily with how stressed we can be with the concern of the year going by without major academic learning. And second, how our children are adapting to the lack of social interaction, which is also a context a preschool or a school provides. So starting from there, let's look at this. Are we concerned so much about the pause in the learning that's happening with our children? As a parent, I think you can not worry about it. I mean, you can really figure out several ways of interacting with your children from a learning experience context. And let's break this conversation into two parts. One of the things that we want to do is manage the learning that's going to be happening. The second thing we also want to manage is how do we still have that inner routine, the day going through. So starting with the routine, and then we'll come to the actual activity of an academic learning. So here we go with, is there a pause? I think not. I don't think there's a pause. Now, why do I say that? Children per se learn everything that they learn from within their environment. So whether it's a language development that's happening, they're happening with watching you, listening to everything that's happening around them. So language is taken care of. What are the other activities that are there from an everyday morning to evening perspective, routine-wise? There's a wake-up time. And as a parent, I'm not sure whether your wake-up time is a fixed one that you would like for your child. If it is, it's even better. It gives a sense of the start of a day is a good one. Can I relax my schedule? Sure, you can relax your schedule, but that schedule shouldn't be so offbeat that you have an extreme, like the child is waking up one day at a 7 a.m. and then another day at 9. Not that kind of an extreme, but yes, a 7 to a 7:30 without you having to be troubled too much works very well. So setting a context of that. What are the first few things that get done with your child? The usual routines of freshening up, the usual routines of a breakfast. So let's take that as a conversation. Chalo. When we take that as a conversation, what's the interactivity? What's the kind of conversation that happens over a mundane activity like brushing teeth? Is there a rhyme that you really want your child to have as a learning experience? Is there a word or a series of words you'd like for him or her to learn? So that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity for you to stop worrying about what the academic year is going to be holding versus what you can do at home as well to encourage a good amount of vocabulary. Whether it's parts of the face that you want to talk about, or whether it's cleanliness that you want to talk about, or hygiene of teeth you want to talk about. It's an everyday activity. And I'm sure we can think of different things that we can do in those 15 minutes of freshening up as well. So routine and learning can go hand in hand. It's not one separate from the other. Now, to the parents out there who are listening, I'm classifying you primarily into two kinds of parents right now. One who have an extremely busy schedule with work from home or leaving for work because you are among the people who fall into the essentials category and are going out to work. How do you manage your schedule, and how does the child manage your schedule with you? So if you are someone who is going out to work, then there is a fixed time to everything. And if you're someone who's working from home, I think you will have to do a little bit of tweaking around with your schedule so that your child's got enough time with you. So covering that. Now, routine again. So we covered the morning bit. Coming back to the routine in terms of the second half of things. What are the activities that I can do with my child on an everyday basis? Let's talk, can I involve him or her in a responsibility at home? So is there anything that I can give my child as his task to do or her task to do which is an everyday activity, as basic as responsibility for switching off the lights at home when not in use, or responsibility for anything which makes him or her feel like a contributor to things that are happening at home. If we can do that, you do two things by this outcome. He or she feels very good about it. Your child is on an extreme high because I'm responsible for it. I own that space. I do well. So what are those small responsibilities that we can give? Let's take a look at that. So I'm dividing the day again. So we've done what kind of learning I can do, what kind of responsibilities I can have with my child. And in all this, there's a learning conversation. So everything depends on how much of an individual time you can actually spare to sit with your child and do an activity. Activities are of two kinds: that which your child is extremely interested in, and activities that you as a parent want your child to do because it's worthwhile doing. And both have to have equal say. So let's talk about every parent's major concern, which keeps coming up as comments. Okay, every parent's major concern is screen time. Now, screen time of all kinds, given the situation we're in, whether it's broadcast in terms of television, or whether it's YouTube, or whether it's activities that he or she is doing as far as playing, using an app on the phone. What do we mean by screen time, and how much is okay? How much was your child used to prior to this lockdown would be my primary question. So if your child was entitled to, when I say entitled, I mean you've allowed that, say about an hour and a half of screen time in a day was normal, that probably would have gone up slightly for some parents or significantly for others. Now, when we say it's gone up, we can choose. We can choose to say what it is that we would want as the quality of what we are viewing. Can I choose apps in my phone which are also stimulants in terms of engaging a child as far as conversation is concerned, as far as development of a new word is concerned, study, fun mathematics? What all can I choose as the interaction? That's entirely up to us as a parent, right? Okay. Second thing is social interaction. Social interaction is also now device based, and for a little while that's going to be so. So how much of your child's time is actually spent engaging in a social interaction with a grandparent, a friend, or anyone else that the child would want to have a conversation with? And how much of that is actually something that you've planned for the day? That's another thinking that we'll end up having to do. How much of it is actually planned for the day? And if it is planned, I think that's a brilliant activity. If the class can get together, if your child's already in school, seeing friends, having a conversation, maybe it's a mealtime conversation, as in a school break time conversation, but it's all fun activities to do, and there's no two ways about it. Now, when we say how easy is it to get your child off a device, well, practically not very easy unless we've established those norms well in advance. So you probably want to have a negotiation conversation with your child as well about, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So, or rather negotiable and not negotiable. And children do understand this. If you have a conversation saying this is acceptable, and after this, the next screen time or app time or game time is tomorrow, they do understand that completely. It isn't so difficult. Give it a try to have a negotiation conversation and reminding them of we've had this conversation. It actually works very, very well. Extremely well. Okay. Now, when we do this negotiation conversation, your child is still going to come back to you and say, Arey, but one more time. Or can I get a few minutes more? Ya ek aur game, ya ek aur level. They are going to come back and they're going to say this to you. How does one handle this tiny bit of nagging that's going to come from a child? And I say nagging because that's how it's perceived. If you make an agreement with your child about, I will give you 15 minutes more on a weekend, honor that and stick to that as an extra that you will give. But agreeing to 15 minutes more just because there is a constant question that comes from the child, I would recommend you being very firm about the fact that we've had this conversation. and 15 minutes or otherwise is not going to work, whereas we already have a schedule that we want to follow. Okay, so who set the schedule? Did your child have a say in setting that schedule? If not, well, the recommendation is that you include your child in that schedule. Today's a Saturday. Over today and tomorrow is a good time to actually sit down with your child and say, okay, let's plan out our week for next week. What are the things that we want to do? And have your child participate in that scheduling of the things that he or she wants to do. They will and they can take responsibility. They like being part of a decision-making activity. And it's so much nicer for them to be able to do it. Right from determining one meal of a day that is actually for, on your child's preference, or as good as what is that one extra activity that you'd like to do together, or what is that time that he or she is going to spend on social interactions, when is that, who would he or she like to meet, whether it is virtually or otherwise, but how do you plan that? And if it's not part of your planning, then social interactions are going to be a challenge. And it can't be abrupt and it can't be unplanned, is simply because it helps you set a routine for your child. He or she knows that this is the time. Now, that means he or she is following up on a schedule. It also means he or she is looking at the time, is keeping abreast of the day of the week, is reading time and understanding, okay, how does this happen? Learns how to maneuver it, reminds you about it, and I think it falls into your bucket then as a parent to honor that time and that schedule that you have set up as well. So yes, so definitely the nagging is going to be tinier. Will it end with one request or two requests or three requests? No, it won't. It will take a little time where they slowly get to understand that constant asking is not necessarily going to mean that it's an accepted behavior mode. They will learn to take responsibility. All right. Now, how does screen time end for you? Does screen time end for you with a lot of crying and tantrum saying, I need to play some more time, and does it end with difficulty? In all probability, no. And for few parents, yes. In that context, what do we do? So I think keeping the tab away or keeping the phone away is got to be left to the child to do. As in, it's time, and therefore you need to keep it away and pack it away until a little while later, is a responsibility you want to give over to your child, rather than being the one to either snatch or forcibly put it away or have a lock and key story. I think enabling them to take that action is a far better option. And you can actually try that. It does work. If it can work in preschools with teachers doing this in a class of, 11 and 12 kids, or sometimes even up to 20 kids, I think as a parent you can easily manage that. Very, very easily, very, very comfortably. Okay. Now, what's a weekend activity you'd like to plan for your child? In a day and age today where they see productive activities as, they love watching YouTube, or they love seeing their peers doing something, can you engage your child in maybe a joint cooking session, which is something that can be on a recording mode? Can you plan an entire session like this where you're going to get them excited about recording something and putting it on YouTube? Again, when I say putting it on YouTube, I mean a very personal level for them to see, not necessarily for a public view. Okay, how do you get that controlled? But can you excite them about it? Can you excite them about, giving their opinion about a toy? Or can you excite them about giving a review about either a book that they've read, or telling a story in their own words? Can you make a video about it? So what is that one unique activity that you can take up for over the weekend, which makes that whole planning and scheduling, is a joint activity with your child? The selection of the story that he wants to tell becomes a plan. How are you going to tell it? You practice it, you do a dry run of it, and then you actually have an actual shoot. You work with the child on this whole activity. It's a full-fledged 2-hour, 3-hour activity, which also gives him or her a great deal of pride. A great deal of pride on this is my creation, my responsibility. And for them to understand when something like that comes out, it did have a lot of planning in the back end. So how do you get a child excited about something like that is another activity that you can look at. It could be telling a story, it could be reviewing a toy. If you live in an area which is absolutely fun about, what shall I say, you can step outside in these COVID times and you do have an environment. Can you look at medicinal plants in your, I don't know, in your backyard? Is that an option? Or what are the activities that you can do when it comes to looking at the kitchen, for example, and saying, okay, there is something medicinal in the kitchen, or staying healthy. How do I build my immunity? These are all topics that you can actually have with your child over a weekend when you have the time for it. And that's the co-creation that I would recommend, whether it's co-creation of a schedule that he wants, whether it's co-creation of an activity that he or she wants to do. But co-create is the norm. You are living in a world where they want to be heard. And rules are also laid down at the time of that negotiation, saying we will do this or we will do that. Now, when you set up, when we set up learning at home, okay, there's a question that came in about homeschooling, so I will come to that. When we set up a learning at home kind of an activity, first is to know what is it that we want to cover, all right? So being aligned to whoever is, the person guiding you on things that you want to cover for the year planned, knowledge of the same. So learning aspects being covered is also about establishing a routine. Now again, here learning in a preschool environment is for you to know whether it's going to involve writing, reading, mathematics, is again a routine conversation. And you don't have to have a fixed story or a fixed vocabulary. All right, so you are doing a developmental activity when it comes to language. You can have both. You can have stories, you can have activities going on at home which are about language development. Getting your child to talk more and listening to him, helping him hear what he said, all of these will lend themselves to activities of language development. Similarly, when it comes to math. So if you're doing an activity, you are going to ask questions around that, right? So whether it's a like we were discussing, whether it's a kitchen activity or whether it's going outdoor activity, whether it's medicinal plants activity, anything you pick up, it's up to you as a parent to choose questions there that lend themselves to asking about mathematics. Okay, so whether it is how many of these are red in color and he picks that as a answer by actually going through it, or he actually turns around and tells you, there's supposed to be 5 here, but we actually have only 4. So helping him point out errors in the making of it. So every activity that you do is actually homeschooling. And at this age of a child, I don't think you need to worry excessively. Yes, you will worry, no matter how much I say don't worry excessively. But joining hands with the preschool that you're associated with to understand what needs to be covered, and doing that in simple ways. There isn't a fixed formula. All of us learn experientially. The children will learn. I don't think you need to worry about them not learning. They will. Now coming to physical activity. When I say physical, I primarily mean writing here. Here's where, I would recommend that you actually take a little time out and understand how much of writing is actually a requirement. The rest of it is primarily mental, oral, and oral. Writing is another ballgame altogether. How do you want them to write? Do you want them to necessarily write only on a piece of paper? Are you okay, giving them a sand kit in which they continuously do their scripting? Are you actually okay for them to be doodling on a white screen? All of these are also activities that lend themselves. Do you want to actually allow messaging to happen, which is literally like messaging which is happening when you're doodling? You want them to look at their doodles and figure out, okay, what's that hidden object you try to draw? So every little activity can have an engaging conversation, and that engaging conversation is equal to language development. That engaging conversation can be, how many circles did you draw? Okay, or let's count how many circles you drew. It's all a possibility. So therefore, trying to tell a parent here, do not worry about an academic year 2020 as being a total washout, or is being something that's an impossible factor, it will work out just well. Just stay in connect with your preschool teams to understand exactly what's being covered, and you really will do a brilliant job. Also, to parents who are watching this, parenting is pretty much a team sport, okay? So when you're trying to set a routine or when you're trying to do an activity, it's very important that the two of you are on the same page. You know, you are a team. Assuming you are a single parent, perfectly, then that question is self-answered, then it doesn't have a worry. But we don't want to necessarily play, good mama versus bad papa, or good papa versus bad mama. That's really not the plan. The plan is just to make sure that your child is actually having a brilliant time studying, learning, without really actually experiencing it in that manner. It's simply brilliant, okay, to actually have an engaged conversation with the children. Now, when we're talking about activities that are happening in a preschool, I'm sure there are small things that you've already learned via your own experience. One thing that happens typically in a school learning environment, or in any learning environment, you can enrich it by creating a small routine of what your 3 hours of learning time looks like, or what your 2 hours of learning time looks like. And your learning time doesn't have to be 2 hours on a continuum. It can be 2 hours spread across the day, because you're right there. So decide what time you want to do what activity. The teachers from the respective from the respective preschools are anyways lending a hand, telling you what are the things that they want to cover. They're anyways having online sessions with you. But even in an online session, please understand that your child cannot possibly sit through it for more than about 20 minutes at a go. It is difficult for them. So planning that online session with the teachers, with the activity that you're doing, also making sure that you stay under the 30-minute outer limit kind of a category when you're trying to engage a child. So all of these are some of the basic things that we bear in mind when we're doing this activity. The right stimulus. Okay, so whether it's bedtime stories, the bedtime story is also a brilliant stimulus. Is it about rereading the story? Yes, it is about rereading the story as well when it comes to bedtime stories, because rereading them enables them to recall the story far better. It also enables them to understand what they need to do to be listening to new words. The season is changing. If the season is changing, there's rainfall, there's bugs in the soil, there's a whole host of activities that you can do just about what's happening, right outside your window on an everyday basis that you can have as a conversation. So, reiterating the fact that at home, while you're homeschooling as you understand it, engaging with the teacher who's actually enabling you to understand what needs to be covered is the formal part of it, which you obviously will take help on. The other part of it is also making a routine happen for yourself and for your child, which is co-authored or co-created with your child to say, this is what we will do. This ensures he or she is engaged. This ensures it is of his or her interest. And it's also something that you agreed upon as a parent. So living up to that agreement is also something he or she learns by default. That if you agree to something, you will live up to it. Okay? So making a series of productive ideas that are working for the both of you, I think that's the key factor between mother and child, or father and child, or both parent and children. So this is where we are on this. Questions that have come in. So Nishita says, this year looks like we will be following homeschooling quite a lot. How can we make sure that all learning aspects of the child are covered? I don't think that's going to be a major concern right now. I think you will. I think we've covered some of that. Now, so learning aspects, Nishita, I would look at two things here. When we say learning aspects, like we said, if your child is in a preschool already, I'm sure you're receiving guidance on the same. And because you're homeschooling, the focus on that is also around the whole day, as in multiple experiences. You will be ensuring that all learning aspects are covered. Like I said, the additional part to this that we need to think about is what are the kind of social interactions that they're having. So you want to make sure that you make time for that as well, for them to have conversations, for them to be doing activities like that. Another question that's come in is, we're a bit confused on taking admission. Okay, this is coming from Zilan Sheikh, about taking admissions for UKG. Okay. Even as online classes are also suggested to stop, which is true, Zilan. Different states have come out with different norms as far as preschool online courses is concerned. Now, whether you should consider taking admission to class 1 directly, okay, Zilan, none of us can actually predict right now about how long COVID is going to happen. We have predictions of it, working well, not working well. So homeschooling works just fine for this age group. And like I said, if you are already with if you're already with a school, well and good. But if you're thinking of taking admission, even while you take admission, and I'll tell you probably why you should, it does give a sense of structure. All right, it does give a sense of routine. Having a fixed time for something is beneficial for the child as well, in as much as it is for you. So you could consider that is where I would recommend. And if you do this also, your learning outcomes, you're saying that your wife has worked as a teacher. Okay, so if you're confident about homeschooling, I wouldn't upset that apple cart at all. But you would want to find a way for social interaction and for a routine being well. Dimpy's written in to say that my son is 2.6 years old. Since school is closed, we're teaching at home, but he's not taking interest in studying. Okay, so how to make teaching interesting to him, I think, is what we've covered, Dimpy, primarily about having him engaged in everything that he does. And at 2.6, yes, at 2.6, where you're actually looking at like a pre-nursery kind of an environment, things that you can do is revolving a lot about developing the fingers, developing his language, developing his ability to recall things in terms of lovely songs and rhymes that you want to build with him. So it doesn't have to have a very, very intense structure, but it does need for you to invest time in repeating it often enough for him to recall it often enough, and then he'll go create his own stories. So using the toys that he has for him to create characters and to make a story himself, getting him to create that own ending of his, in a well-known story, all of those are simple activities that you can take up at home. Rube says, my child is only 3 years old, joined school this year. However, due to lockdown, he's disconnected from the organizational teaching. He isn't willing to study. I don't know how I can teach him properly without scolding him. Okay, so Rube, scolding is not necessarily something that one needs to be, fighting with oneself for as a parent. I mean, we tend to scold because we are worried. So I think the one thing that you can do to help yourself is to actually say, he joined school, so reach out to the school and reach out to them and say, okay, what do you want us to do? Take advice on what it is that they want covered and what is it that they need help with in terms of coverage. Rest, the school will handle it, I'm sure. But when you say he's frightened now, he's frightened to go back to school, or he's frightened on account of COVID, or I'm not particularly sure I understand that bit of the frightened, but he's also frightened because he's not interacting with people. So a school can be a fun place. I mean, getting to know one or two of the parents and then you initiating a conversation or social time for him is a starting point, would be my recommendation. All right. Rohan Pinto, I completely understand. When online classes for kids up to grade 2 has stopped, it's extremely difficult for parents who are working from home who are also multitasking. Completely understandable. Rohan, my question to you is, when you are multitasking from home and you have worked from home, is there a way for you to reorganize your schedule that you get the middle of the day free? Now, I know that this is not exactly the easiest, but is it possible for you to set up a schedule for yourself like that in collaboration? And I say so because I've done this myself. I actually take time out in the afternoon because that's the only time I get to actually do work, which is, non-work from home, but work at home. So how do I balance my days? By having a conversation with people, giving them time slots on where I'm available. Work will get done, except for meetings where everybody's required. I do manage my time like that. And Rohan, I do honestly recommend that you do this. And in your multitasking, have a shared conversation with your child as well about what are his or her contributions to this. What will he help with? Like I was saying, I was giving you a simple example of how do I manage getting my child equally involved in this. It's doable, Rohan, but schedule it, sit down, create a schedule with your child, and please, it is a greater onus to actually stick to that schedule. So please have more involvement. They can help with a whole bunch of things. Abhijit's question is, will it be helpful for 4 to 5-year-old kids to learn through online medium? Abhijit, primarily yes, because it's a limited time frame, right? You're not doing Zoom forever on it, and you are very conscious about the time that you want to actually have your child being engaged in an on-screen conversation. So here's where the thing is. So when we say online, frankly, my experience has been the child is anyways on a device at some point of time or the other. How can we use that to become a little more creative and a little more productive is where I think my focus has been. So if there is screen time, if there is Zoom class happening, with a child so young, you're obviously spending your time as well sitting there working with the child. So here, will it be helpful? 2 parts to this. It will for a particular point where he's actually got a structure happening, and therefore he's part of another environment where he sees other children as well, because it's visually appealing for him to have that interaction, and he can talk and he has a say. But it's equally important that you're also seated there making sure that he's actually engaged in that, right? So it's up to the teacher on the other end who's making it interesting by interactively keeping the children involved. That's one side. But yes, it's helpful because it does put a structure into place and does give you a structure as well about the kind of learning outcomes that are compulsorily to be done, ideally. Okay, Kiruthi. So my son is 3 years old, still has not joined school due to COVID situation. Any tips on how to give him schooling from home? Oh yes. Kiruthi, topics that can be covered from home is ranging from animals to, what I see outside, to naming objects, to listening to stories and reading up. So when I say reading up, he's 3 years old. So can you start with putting up letters, on his cupboard, or on the side of his on a wall in his room? Can you start doing that? Can you put up numbers somewhere? Can you start associations of how many? So if you're putting up one, pictorial associations of the two. If you're needing atta, can you give him something to play with as well? Can you work with him on an absolute activity of getting his hands wet and using a chart paper and doing sprinkling colors on that? Different things that you want to do, each of them Kiruthi is a learning experience. So whether you're talking about colors or whether you're talking about how you're going to be making a sandwich for him, even in that, what do we do first, what do we do second is also an activity, and it's a conversation. So don't excessively worry about necessarily topics that you're going to cover. Your topics will end up covering fruits, vegetables, animals, marine life and objects. By default, you're covering manners, good manners to have at home, eating habits to have at home, nutrition. You're anyways as a mother doing that. So topics is in plenty and you're covering that. Now, from a core academic topic, I recommend you, the kind of schools that you're looking at and what do they do. For a 3-year-old, it's primarily a whole lot of listening. So whether we are listening to rhymes and stories, and rhymes in different languages and stories in different languages, so that they are adaptable and they learn more. But Kirti, that's it. Numbers, I don't think you really want to go beyond a 20 or a 30 right now. They'll learn. Once they get a hang of the 20 moving to 30, they automatically know the 31s. They'll help you with the solutions. So don't worry about it. Anubhuti. So my 3.4-year-old girl is used to hitting very often, although nobody in the house is practicing this kind of behavior. She's very aggressive. She's aggressive when she doesn't get what she wants. Anubhuti, here's my question to you, because this doesn't give me a perspective. So she practices this kind of behavior when she's upset is obviously the scene. You're going to have to probably say a little more about what causes the upset. Is it because she doesn't get what she wants? Is it because she's not getting enough attention? Is she not being heard? It's typically the behavior would be an outcome of something else, not just what's appearing on the scene, right? Something's upset her. Figuring out what it is, and I wouldn't say laying down rules, but you would need to talk to her more often to actually understand what's worrying her. What is it that actually worries her? That's probably where you want to get started. And it's got to be common, getting to the bottom of the emotion. It's making her feel like hitting somebody. There's some emotion that's making her feel like hitting someone at home. While you can't encourage that kind of behavior, because tomorrow she does have to step out and move on in society. So obviously not a workable option. But not a workable option hitting anybody at home either. So also establishing the rule that it's unacceptable behavior. Also accepting the fact that it requires some kind of when I use the word disciplining, I don't mean punishing. I just mean disciplining in the sense, if she does that repeated behavior, there is a disciplinary action that comes on account of, no, you have to let go something that you like because you're doing that, or you are not going to be allowed to watch TV today if you do that, and sticking to it. So modifying behavior is a time consuming activity. It won't happen very easily, Anubhuti, and that's something that you have to be game for when you're trying to change behavior. So I would recommend having a conversation to understand what causes that kind of behavior. It's something that you should delve into a little deeper. Prakash says, my son is 3 now and lockdowns and government rules all schools and not running. What we do for his education at home? Bought the Intellikit and alphabet magnet study, but nowadays he's playing games. Okay, so when he's playing games, Prakash, I don't think it's a bad deal that he's playing games, because that's what children at this age should be doing. And everything that you're trying to teach him is also via play. So even when, if the kit is not being used per se, I would recommend that you use that kit along with things that you're trying to do and have an activity with him on that. But he's not going to be able to do this without your support. There is time invested and a lot of time invested in making that happen. So Prakash, I would recommend that you use the kit. I would recommend that whether it's the magnetic study kit as well, playing a game, making a shape out of it, using the entire thing to create the A's and the B's and the C's, helping him create that, using it to write alongside, because he is 3, so you probably are starting some kind of tracing activities. So let him write that, let him make the B and the C out of all the shapes put together, let him trace it out for himself. But you will have to take that as play time, and it's play time that is actually the best learning time. So I think that's a safe place to be. My daughter is 2.6 years old, but she can't join words to make a sentence. I help her so much, but she can't respond. Sono, hi. Sono, I don't think you need to start worrying right now in terms of her being able to string sentences. Sono, if she's able to communicate with you about what she wants, I think that's brilliant. Okay, so she's not, if she can string even 2 words together, so whether it is I want milk or I'm sleepy or anything together to indicate her actual physical and emotional connect right now, it's fine. She still has time. So 2.6 I know is a time where there are several children that talk at a stretch non-stop as well, but you haven't come to a stage where you're in an extreme concern zone or anything. That age is just fine. She'll bring it together. Also, does she read aloud with you? Does she actually have a session with you where she's joining words together with you? Not necessarily on her own, not a sentence she's trying to construct, but something that's something that you're helping her with in terms of a reading activity. Okay, what else? Mona, after completing online classes, what does my child have to do for her eyes? Mona, this is true for online and this is true for any game or any activity or any TV viewing. My recommendation is for you to be looking at any activities that she can do, which is a yoga practice. I mean, whether you're using your fingers to put it ahead and then stare at it, for moving it to the left and to your right, relaxing it, keeping it shut for a few minutes. And also the fact that you constantly do water your eyes as well. So, splashing water into your eyes, cooling them down, given the climate that India is in right now. All of these activities. So it's not only about an online class, but it's about any device for any elongated period of time. And this is true for an adult as well. We all need the eye exercises for ourselves. So all is good with that. J.S. Mehta, my child is 3. She took admission in play school at 2.5, but due to lockdown, everything stopped. Although we're trying our best to engage her in some learning activities, she hardly takes any interest. So I think we've covered the interest part of it, J.S. Mehta. So interest will happen if there is involvement. Interest is about also engaging them in having to choose what they will do. So if it is whether they want to count time with you, or stand in the terrace or stand in your balcony and count the number of cars that are going by, and pretend to play a hide and seek in how many locations she hid in, or creating a treasure hunt for your child, where you play alongside. All of these are interest activities, but it does involve us as parents to be taking that and playing along. The expectation that they will have an inherent interest by themselves only will happen if it's actually interesting for them. So, and getting that is, like I said, co-creating a schedule with your child. What does he or she want to do, and getting them to own that given schedule and have fun around that schedule. So that's pretty much how I would recommend you to take this on. Their interest is also something you have to understand. The more repeated activity that you do, the more you say, let's do a drawing today, or let's do a coloring today, unless it's actually exciting, they're going to detest it very, very soon, right? So it's also up to us to keep finding activities to do, and which is what your teachers or the school that you're currently in, where you've taken admission in, they will have a host of activities to help you with. And there are obviously a host of activities online as well. Like I said, whether you want to do a story shoot, or whether you want to tell me the best features about the dinosaur toy that you have, or whether you want to play in sand, there are a host of activities. Thing is to be able to build a schedule which has a non-repeated set across many days, but have fun doing it as well. Okay. My child has started with homeschooling, but he's very fussy about studying. How do I make him study and write? So Komal, hi. So I'm while you say that he started with homeschooling, fussy is when there is force, right? When we force a routine, it's fussy. So I can't but reiterate the fact that you can't force them. It has to be an ownership with your child, and a routine establishment with your child, and it's not about forcing. It will take you probably 10 days to get there, but it is about that whole routine. Chalo, whether it's sitting down together for a meal, or whether it is sitting down to study, it's the same routine that, better. So here, how do I make him write? So I'm not sure how old your child is, but how do I make him write is primarily other activities of writing, where you're actually doing tracing activities. If it is about writing within 2 lines, or whether it is writing within 4 lines, it won't happen for more than 1 or 2 pages in a day at the outer limit. So when you want to get him to write also, you want to say that it's a very, very crisp activity that you're going to do once a day for 10 minutes. Given the age that he or she, given the age that he is. Do you think preschooling is important? Nirmala, yes, I think preschooling is important. And why I say so is because unless you're in a really large family right now, where there's lots of kids and lots of people around for a continuous conversation, continuous interaction, new things happening every day, children growing up to understand what a social interaction feels like, and understanding others, looking at other people's body language and understanding, okay, what I said, it didn't really go well there, or I should have behaved better. These are soft learnings, Nirmala. And I think a lot of this comes from a preschool. And also the fact that children do learn by observation. They look at other kids and learn as well. So it's so much easier to have a tiffin or a meal session happening with children across, getting them to eat what everybody's eating, When does that happen is when it's a larger environment. So if you're part of a really large family that's getting together, it's probably a lot easier for you. But otherwise, if you're in a nuclear family, I would recommend definitely a preschooling environment. And that's, like I said, for a whole bunch of reasons, not just one. Why is preschool important? My uncle is considering skipping it for my brother. I think I just answered that, Dimple. My uncle is considering skipping it for my brother. So if you, like I said, if you have the time to invest in homeschooling and you consciously make space for social learning, where you, in this COVID time, is a very different factor. So I'm going to keep that aside for a moment. But if you're a parent who's going to find ways of saying, okay, I'm definitely taking my son out there to learn swimming, or I do have places where he or she is participating in activities, is meeting other children and all of that, then when you say, maybe I'll consider skipping preschool, but it still has a flaw, and I'll tell you where. There are many parents who still believe it's okay to send a child straight to school without sending them to preschool. Here's where I have a disconnect with that. A school is a much larger environment. Okay, so when you're going into grade 1 straight away, and if you've never been into a space where you've had to adjust a schedule for yourself about a small group environment, or a small, where a teacher's just handling 10 kids, you have someone to care for you over there. You're part of a routine. You understand what it's like to come out of the house. Okay, how do you then manage this in a big school environment? So a preschool does exactly that. It paves the way for a large school environment, and it helps you adjust a lot sooner to that environment. So I wouldn't recommend your uncle, skipping it for your brother. Saha, is STEM philosophy better, or STEAM philosophy better for little ones than Montessori? I'm looking at preschooling and can't decide what it is that would be best for my little one. Okay, this is coming to school of thought, and here's what I'd say very, very honestly, Saha. Every preschool philosophy, whether you're going to look at Montessori or whether you're going to look at STEAM philosophy, I'm not going to get into which is the better one, because that's not our topic right now. But each of them come with the fact that there is experiential learning. You learn with your interactions. Montessori has been around long enough for us to understand it's not just about preschool then. Montessori goes up to a much higher grade level. And you pretty much are in control of your own learning. It's not rote. It's not structured necessarily in a very, very, very limited manner. It's got a lot of flexibility. So what I choose, yes, STEAM makes sense because that's the way forward, but Montessori lays foundation. So whichever school your child goes to, here's the catch, right? So whichever school or whichever structure that you choose for your child to be attending, function is that it's a lot more than just learning to read or learning to write. It's also learning to think. It's learning to talk. It's learning to understand human behavior. It's learning to interact with other children and saying, it's a happy space. It's learning to take social responsibility as well. They actually have a good time there. They stand up for their friends. So it's a combination of things. But if you're looking for a structure, I'm not giving you a recommendation, but I am saying the fact that you don't want to, I'll tell you what not to look for. Don't look for something which is absolutely structured. It's about writing, it's about reading, and it's about language. That's not the place for you. Because that anyways he or she is going to do right after school begins. That's going to be the structure going forward. So hang on there and let them have a social structured environment. Ujwala, my sister is planning to homeschool her son this year and maybe move to homeschool permanently. You think homeschooling is advisable and better than the traditional way of teaching? Traditional way of teaching is not something I advocate anymore. Even if it's at a preschool or at a school level, I am a firm advocate of moving away from traditional ways of teaching. So which means I do believe in inquiry based, I do believe in activity based. So if homeschooling is going to cater to that definitely is a good way to go. But homeschooling also requires you to be a very, very invested parent. You can't suddenly stop it and then pick up your child and go put him or her in another regular school. Adjustment there is going to take a while. So if you're absolutely sure that that's what you want to do, sure enough, that's fine. And how do you cover aspects of child learning and homeschooling? Homeschooling also has a structure, right? You're still going to follow a board. You're still going to look at assessments. You're still going to worry about how it's going to get learned. You're going to train yourself as a parent on what's the best way to teach I was going to say physics, but I'm going to change that. What's the best way to teach fractions to a child? So you will anyways invest yourself in training yourself as well. You will look at more project-based learning. You will have once you start homeschooling, you also realize there's a community of parents out there already doing it. If homeschooling is an outcome of COVID as a scare or something else, then my answer to this is I don't think that's the best way necessarily, because I think learning to live in a social world where borders are continuously reducing and everything is a interaction, I think that's a more important space. So that's my recommendation is, trying not to create silos is where I am right now. Okay. Shweta, hi, ma'am, my son is 8+. He stammers at times and very conscious, misses words. And I don't, okay, is it okay to correct him or should we ignore? I was really harsh with him earlier, but as he's growing, he hides and I've often spoken to him, but he can't just stop. And secondly, he's not able to come up with any interest, games, outdoor, indoor, reading, you name anything. He just loves to watch TV. Being a parent, I can't let him do this. Okay, so Shweta, hi. First is, thank you for acknowledging the fact that you want to change this. Yeah, so Shweta, there's every possibility that he loves watching TV because he gets a chance to being passive and doesn't have to have an interaction, right? He doesn't have to talk to anybody. It's a passive activity. Now, you're right in being worried and saying that, it can't continue in this form. Who are his friends? Who are his siblings who can have this conversation? And it's not about correcting him. It's about just having it's about continued chatting with him where he's got to be the chatting person and not you, right? So when you say this, whether it's a grandparent or whether it's a sibling, a fond cousin, anyone except you necessarily right now staying out of the picture, how can you start this? Also, I think you would definitely make sure that he's protected from that environment of nobody bullies him or anything like that. If he makes a mistake or if he's stammering, perfectly fine, let him continue. It's all right. Don't correct him. Don't stop him. Whether it's mirror exercises, meeting a counselor to actually overcome this, I think one professional intervention of a counselor is a requirement to determine whether it's actually something that needs intervention. Because if it isn't, he will grow out of it like all children do, but because they need a space to have conversations. Making sure that his friends are also very supportive and he has a great supportive friend environment that does not mock him is another task that you will have to take up with the friends' mothers and the school as help on the same. Darshika, my son is 2.8 and doesn't seem to be interested in anything. If he tries something new, he'll be bored in 5 minutes. Darshika, I'm going to ask you to check whether you as a parent also are someone who's very, you try new things for him, to continuously keep his engagement happening. What he doesn't then experience, Darshika, he's not experiencing any kind of closure or, what's the word I want to use? Creative joy. I made this, I did it, and therefore I have a lot of appreciation coming on the same. A sense of achievement. Try a small activity where there's a sense of achievement with him. And if that's working, then I recommend you try repeating that throughout because that's going to be very, very helpful. I think we have time for one last question. Shweta, my son is 4 years old and his behavior is rash at times. Maybe he's getting home missing his friends. Oh, Shweta, I couldn't agree with you more. Kudos to the children who are managing this COVID times and being stuck, which is why one of the things I said is please ensure some level of social interaction, even if it means an online interaction, setting up a call, enabling them to chat, enabling them to play. Not an online game necessarily, but definitely, it can be a battle of words. It can be somebody sings one line of a rhyme and the other child continues, or some activity which continuously is involving them to be socially connected. I think that's a plus that you need to give your child, and that's a plus which is part of a routine, connecting with different parents and saying let's set up a child zone time, where all of our children are getting together on an everyday or an every alternate day basis. But that's something that's equally important in as much as everyone's concerns about homeschooling or learning or writing. Social interactivity is a must, and I think is the need of the hour. This is where our children are right now. Okay, so so if there's nothing else, in terms of anything else, I think we're kind of really, perfect on our time right now. I'll just see if there are any more questions that are coming up. But otherwise, yes. So here's a quick recap. Recommendation is that you work with your child on creating a schedule. As parents, you probably want to join hands together and work as a team. Join hands together, work as a team. Work on creating a schedule and work on creating a plan of sticking to that schedule with your child. Think of new activities that you want to do. Coordinate with your school or your preschool and figure out what it is that they want to accomplish as learning outcomes. Work with them on manners in which it can get done, which are acceptable for your child as well. You know your child more than anyone else. It's a team sport, parenting, yeah. So worrying about an academic year 2020, let's not worry too much. Our children are at a phase where they will pick up very, very quickly. Finding what interests them, making sure they stick to their routines. Diversions on weekends is a special grant. Getting them to co-create, co-own what they've created, giving them a sense of achievement. All of these become important activities that each of you can take up. I certainly hope the session has been helpful for you all. It's been an absolutely great time interacting with each of you. So thank you very much, and have a great weekend, people. Thank you. Namaste.